The thunder of hooves matched the pounding in Olivia Zimmerman's chest as she raced down Fargo's Main Street, North Dakota's unforgiving dust swirling behind her. The year was 1876, and she'd just made the worst or perhaps the best mistake of her 22 years. She'd spoken back to Matthew Farrell, the most feared man in the Dakota Territory. The wind whipped Olivia's auburn hair around her face as her mare struggled beneath her. She'd pushed the animal too hard, but fear had a way of making a person reckless. 3 miles out of town, she finally slowed, allowing her horse to catch its breath. Her own breathing came in ragged gasps as she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see Matthew's imposing figure on the horizon. Olivia had arrived in Fargo just 2 weeks prior, stepping off the train with nothing but a small trunk and dreams of a fresh start. Her parents had passed within months of each other back in Philadelphia, leaving her with little choice but to accept her aunt's invitation to come west. But Aunt Martha's letter hadn't mentioned the drought gripping the region, nor that her modest farm stood on the brink of ruin. "You've a sharp tongue and sharper mind, Olivia," Aunt Martha had said that morning, "but I beg you, hold them both when you go into town. Especially around the Farrell brothers." Olivia had nodded dutifully, though privately she'd scoffed. She'd dealt with difficult men in Philadelphia. How much worse could these frontier ruffians be? She found out that afternoon when she accidentally bumped into Matthew Farrell outside the general store, causing him to drop an expensive bottle of imported whiskey. The bottle shattered on the boardwalk, the amber liquid seeping into the parched wood. The street had gone silent. People froze in place, their faces masks of terror. Matthew Farrell stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders blocking the sun. His face darkened as he looked from the broken glass to Olivia. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" His voice was low, dangerous. Most people would have cowered, most people would have begged forgiveness. Olivia Zimmerman wasn't most people. It was an accident, she'd said firmly. And perhaps if you weren't standing in the doorway like some immovable mountain, it wouldn't have happened. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Matthew's eyes, a startling green against his sun-bronzed skin, widened in disbelief. For a moment, he seemed too shocked to speak. Then his expression hardened, and his hands, massive, callous things, clenched into fists. "You must be new here," he said finally, his voice like gravel. "So I'll give you one chance to apologize properly." Olivia had lifted her chin. "I've already acknowledged it was an accident. I won't grovel for your forgiveness over spilled liquor." Something dangerous flickered in Matthew's eyes. He took a step toward her, and that's when his leather glove fell from his belt. Without thinking, Olivia bent down and picked it up. Instead of returning it, she'd clutched it tightly. "I believe this is yours, Mr. Farrell. Perhaps we can discuss a fair trade this glove for a bottle of whiskey that's not quite so expensive." Now, as Olivia slowed her horse to a walk, she looked down at the glove still clutched in her hand. What had possessed her to take it, to challenge him? The stories about Matthew Farrell had circulated quickly after her arrival, how he'd once beaten a man nearly to death for cheating at cards, how even the sheriff gave him wide berth, how his temper was as legendary as his skill with a gun. Olivia tucked the glove into her saddlebag. She'd return it tomorrow, she decided, with a proper apology. She wasn't a fool brave, perhaps, but not foolish enough to make an enemy of the most dangerous man in the territory. Little did she know, Matthew Farrell was already on his way to Aunt Martha's farm, his expression thunderous as he rode. Martha Zimmerman was hanging laundry when she saw the cloud of dust approaching. Her weathered face paled. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, recognizing the rider even at a distance. She'd been in Fargo long enough to know that a visit from Matthew Farrell rarely ended well. She hurried inside to put on a pot of coffee. If there was one thing Martha knew about men with tempers, it was that they were marginally more reasonable with something warm in their bellies. Matthew dismounted with fluid grace that belied his size. He removed his hat as he approached the porch, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, his voice controlled. "I believe your niece and I had a misunderstanding in town today." Martha clasped her hands to keep them from trembling. "Mr. Farrell, I apologize if Olivia caused offense. She's new to our ways." A muscle worked in his jaw. "She has something that belongs to me." "She's not back yet," Martha said quickly. "But please come in. I've just made coffee." To her surprise, he nodded and followed her inside. Matthew had to duck to enter the modest cabin. Inside, he seemed to take up all the available space, his broad shoulders nearly brushing both walls of the narrow kitchen. Martha poured him coffee in her best china cup, a relic from her life back east before her husband had dragged her to this unforgiving land. "Cream, sugar." "Black," he said, taking the cup. His hands dwarfed the delicate china, making Martha wince, anticipating another broken item. But he handled it with surprising care. "Your niece," he said after a moment, "she doesn't seem to understand her place here." Martha bristled despite her fear. "Her place? In Fargo," he clarified. "This isn't Philadelphia. There are rules, unspoken understandings." "Like not speaking back to Matthew Farrell?" The words escaped before Martha could stop them. To her astonishment, the corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. "Among others." Martha studied him. The stories about Matthew's violence were numerous, but now, sitting in her kitchen, there was something else about him, a weariness, perhaps. A loneliness that Martha recognized all too well. "My niece is headstrong," Martha said carefully, "but she has a good heart, and she's smart as a whip." Matthew's gaze was steady. "Smart people usually know better than to challenge me. Perhaps that's precisely why she did." Martha surprised herself with her boldness. "When was the last time someone didn't cower before you, Mr. Farrell?" He stared at her, then set the cup down with exaggerated care. "I'll wait outside for her return." Olivia saw him before he saw her. He was sitting on their porch steps, hat beside him, elbows resting on his knees. Even in repose, there was something intimidating about him, a coiled energy that suggested he could spring into action at any moment. She considered turning her horse around, but that would only delay the inevitable. With a deep breath, she straightened her spine and continued forward. Matthew rose as she approached, his expression unreadable. Olivia dismounted, her legs shaky after the long ride. "Mr. Farrell," she acknowledged, trying to keep her voice steady. "I assume you've come for this." She reached into her saddlebag and retrieved his glove. He made no move to take it. "You stole my property." "I picked it up when you dropped it," she corrected. "Though I concede I should have returned it immediately. You challenged me in front of the entire town." Olivia swallowed hard. "That wasn't my intention." His eyebrows rose. "Wasn't it?" "You stood there, bold as brass, and suggested I was, how did you put it, an immovable mountain." Despite her fear, Olivia couldn't help but notice how his accent changed when he was angry, a hint of something Irish perhaps, buried beneath years of Western drawl. "I apologize for my rudeness," she said finally, "and for the whiskey I'll pay for it." "With what? Your aunt can barely keep this farm afloat." The truth of his words stung. Olivia glanced at the cabin, noting the sagging porch, the patched roof. "I'll find work in town." Matthew stepped closer, and Olivia held her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to retreat. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar cutting through his right eyebrow. "No one will hire you," he said flatly. "Not after you crossed me." Anger flared within her. "So that's how it works here. You dictate who can earn a living." "I don't dictate anything, but people make their own choices about who they associate with." Olivia thrust the glove toward him. "Take it. Consider our business concluded." Instead of taking the glove, Matthew studied her face. "You're not afraid of me," he said, sounding genuinely perplexed. "I'm terrified," Olivia admitted, "but I won't show it." Something shifted in his expression, then a softening around the eyes, perhaps. "You'll work for me," he said abruptly. "I beg your pardon," to pay for the whiskey, "and to make amends for your disrespect. My housekeeper left last week. You'll take her place until your debt is settled." Olivia opened her mouth to refuse, then closed it. They needed the money desperately. And perhaps this was a chance to understand the man everyone feared. "I'll consider it," she said cautiously. Matthew took the glove from her outstretched hand, his fingers brushing hers briefly. A jolt of something not quite fear, not quite excitement coursed through her. "Tomorrow morning," he said. 8 o'clock. My ranch is. Everyone knows where the Farrell ranch is, Mr. Farrell." That ghost of a smile touched his lips again. 8 o'clock, he repeated, then turned and strode to his horse. Olivia watched him ride away, her heart hammering. What had she just agreed to? Inside, Aunt Martha was wide-eyed with disbelief. "You're going to work for Matthew Farrell? Have you lost your senses?" "Perhaps," Olivia admitted, sinking into a chair, "but we need the money and I did break his whiskey." Martha shook her head. "There's more to that man than meets the eye, Olivia. The stories about his temper aren't exaggerated. I've seen the aftermath." "But," she hesitated. "But what?" "But there are other stories, too, about how he paid for Doc Miller's son to see a specialist in Chicago when the boy fell ill. How he silently leaves supplies for widows during harsh winters." Martha sighed. "He's not simple, Matthew Farrell." Olivia nodded slowly, remembering the brief moment when something had shifted in his gaze. "I suppose I'll find out for myself." The Farrell Ranch lay 5 miles northwest of Fargo, a sprawling property that spoke of considerable wealth. Olivia arrived precisely at 8, her mare fresh and rested. The main house was larger than she'd expected, 2 stories of solid timber with a wide veranda wrapping around it. A young, stable hand took her horse, eyeing her with undisguised curiosity. "You the new housekeeper?" he asked. "Temporarily," Olivia clarified. The boy, no older than 16, whistled low. "Brave woman. The last one left crying after Mr. Farrell lost his temper over a burnt roast." Olivia's resolve wavered slightly, but she squared her shoulders and approached the house. Before she could knock, the door swung open. Matthew stood there, dressed more formally than she'd seen him before. Dark trousers, a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. His hair was damp as if he'd just washed it. "You came," he said, sounding faintly surprised. "I gave my word." He stepped aside to let her enter. The interior of the house was unexpectedly refined, polished wooden floors, quality furniture, shelves lined with books. A piano stood in the corner of the parlor, its surface gleaming. "Do you play?" she asked, gesturing toward it. Matthew's expression closed. "My mother did." Olivia sensed she'd touched on something private. She changed the subject. "What will my duties be?" "Cooking, cleaning, laundry," he replied, leading her through to a spacious kitchen at the back of the house. "My brother Daniel and I take most meals here, though occasionally we host business associates. I wasn't aware you had a brother. Younger by 5 years. He manages most of our business affairs in town while I handle the ranch." Olivia nodded, taking in the well-appointed kitchen. "And where is he now?" "In Bismarck until the end of the week." Matthew opened a pantry door, revealing well-stocked shelves. "You'll find everything you need here." "I take breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6 in the evening. Those are long hours. You have somewhere else to be." His tone had an edge to it. "My aunt might appreciate my help on the farm," Olivia replied evenly. Something like guilt flickered across his face. "You can leave by 4 each day except when we have guests. Will that suffice?" Olivia nodded, surprised by his accommodation. "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. Olivia cleared her throat. "I should get started then." "Yes," Matthew agreed, then hesitated. "Miss Zimmerman, I should warn you I have certain expectations about how things are done here." "I assumed as much. And I don't tolerate mistakes." Olivia met his gaze directly. "Neither do I, Mr. Farrell, but they happen nonetheless. The question is how we respond to them." He stared at her for a long moment, then turned on his heel and left without another word. Left alone, Olivia explored the kitchen, familiarizing herself with its layout. The previous housekeeper had left things in good order, at least. She found a worn apron hanging on a hook and put it on, rolling up her sleeves. By the time Matthew returned for dinner at noon, she had prepared a simple but hearty meal: roast beef sandwiches, potato salad, and fresh apple pie that she'd found in the pantry. He sat at the kitchen table rather than the formal dining room, watching as she served him. "The pie isn't mine," she admitted. "I found it in the pantry, still fresh." Matthew cut into it. "Mrs. Benson from town brings them over. She thinks I need fattening up." "Do you always eat alone?" Olivia asked, then regretted the personal question. To her surprise, he answered. "Often. Daniel prefers to dine in town when he's here, says the company's better." There was something in his tone that suggested this was a point of contention between the brothers. Olivia filled the silence by pouring him coffee. "Aren't you eating?" he asked. "I didn't know if I was expected to." Matthew frowned. "Of course you're expected to eat. Sit down." Olivia hesitated, then took the seat across from him. She served herself a modest portion, aware of his eyes on her. "You don't look like a housekeeper," he said abruptly. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "What does a housekeeper look like, not like you?" The words seemed to slip out before he could stop them. A faint flush colored his cheekbones. Olivia wasn't sure how to respond. She focused on her food, acutely aware of his presence across the table. Despite his intimidating reputation, there was something compelling about Matthew Farrell. A depth behind those green eyes that hinted at more than just the angry rancher everyone feared. "The food is good," he said after a while, his tone gruff as if compliments didn't come easily to him. "Thank you." "How long have you been in Fargo?" 2 weeks, he nodded as if confirming something. "And before that, Philadelphia your aunt mentioned?" "Yes. I lived there my whole life until my parents died." Something shifted in his expression. "I'm sorry." The sympathy seemed genuine, surprising her. "Thank you. And why Fargo? It's not exactly a cultural hub compared to Philadelphia." Olivia smiled slightly. "I had nowhere else to go." "Aunt Martha is my only living relative." Matthew studied her, his gaze intense. "You're educated, I can tell by how you speak." "My father was a professor at the university. He believed daughters deserved education as much as sons, progressive of him." "Yes," Olivia agreed. "Though it hasn't served me particularly well out here." "Intelligence is never wasted, Miss Zimmerman, even in Fargo." Coming from him, the words felt significant somehow. Olivia found herself wondering about his own education. His vocabulary and occasional turns of phrase suggested more refinement than one might expect from a Western rancher. After dinner, Matthew disappeared to attend to ranch business, leaving Olivia to clean up and begin the afternoon's chores. She found herself exploring the house as she worked, noting details that revealed bits of its owner's character: the well-stocked bookshelves containing volumes of history and philosophy, the quality pen and inkwell on the desk in the study, the complete absence of personal photographs or mementos. It was as if the house, for all its comforts, was deliberately impersonal. A place to exist rather than to live. By 4 o'clock, Olivia had finished her duties for the day. She found Matthew in the stables, discussing something with a ranch hand. He dismissed the man when he saw her approach. "Leaving?" he asked. "It's 4, she reminded him. He nodded. "Same time tomorrow?" "Yes." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for the opportunity to work, Mr. Farrell." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You're welcome, Miss Zimmerman." As Olivia rode home, she found herself replaying their interactions, trying to reconcile the man she'd spent the day with against his fearsome reputation. There was anger there. Certainly she could sense it simmering beneath his controlled exterior. But there was something else too, something wounded. Days passed, settling into a routine. Each morning Olivia arrived at the Farrell ranch at 8, prepared meals, cleaned, and performed whatever tasks were needed. Matthew was often absent during the day, attending to ranch business, but they shared dinner at noon, their conversations gradually becoming less stilted. She learned that he had built the ranch from nothing after coming west as a young man, that he read voraciously in the evenings. That despite his wealth, he lived simply, investing most of his profits back into the ranch or, surprisingly, the town's development. "Why do you care so much about Fargo?" she asked him one day as they ate. Matthew was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, because someone should, this place could be more than a stopping point for people headed elsewhere. Is that what it is for you? A stopping point, his green eyes fixed on hers. This is home, Miss Zimmerman, for better or worse. On her 5th day working at the ranch, Olivia was dusting the bookshelves in the study when she came across a small, worn daguerreotype tucked between 2 volumes. Curiosity got the better of her. She carefully extracted it and found herself looking at a family portrait, a stern-faced man, a beautiful dark-haired woman, and 2 boys. The older boy, clearly Matthew, stood rigid beside his father, while the younger, presumably Daniel, leaned slightly toward his mother. That's private. Olivia started, nearly dropping the image. Matthew stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to pry. But you did." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and snatched the daguerreotype from her hands, his fingers brushing hers in the process. Again, that strange jolt coursed through her. "It was a mistake," Olivia said, standing her ground. "I apologize." "You seem to make a lot of mistakes around my possessions, Miss Zimmerman." The unfairness of this stung. "That's not true. I've been nothing but careful with your belongings since I began working here, except when you're snooping through my personal affairs." "I wasn't snooping. It was between books I was dusting and I." She trailed off, realizing explanations would only sound like excuses. "You're right, I shouldn't have looked at it, I apologize." Matthew's jaw worked as he stared at her, then down at the image in his hand. Some of the anger seemed to drain from him. "My father," he said after a moment, "not a kind man." The unexpected confession caught Olivia off guard. "I'm sorry," she said again, but with a different meaning this time. Matthew tucked the daguerreotype into his pocket. "Finish your work," he said, his voice gruff. Then he left, closing the door firmly behind him. That evening, as Olivia prepared to leave, a violent thunderstorm rolled in from the west. The sky darkened prematurely, and lightning split the heavens as torrential rain began to fall. "You can't ride home in this," Matthew said, appearing in the kitchen doorway. "You'll stay here tonight." It wasn't a request. Olivia bit back her automatic objection, knowing he was right. The road to her aunt's farm would be treacherous in such weather. "I should send word to my aunt so she won't worry," Matthew nodded. "I'll have one of the hands ride over. There's a spare bedroom upstairs, first door on the left. It should have everything you need." Dinner that evening was a quiet affair. Matthew seemed preoccupied, and Olivia was acutely aware that they were alone in the house save for a couple of ranch hands who slept in the bunkhouse. After the meal, she expected Matthew to retire to his study as usual, but instead he lingered in the kitchen, watching as she washed the dishes. "You don't have to do that now," he said finally. "It's past your working hours." Olivia smiled slightly. "I don't mind, it helps to stay busy." Thunder crashed overhead, making her jump. Matthew moved closer, his tall frame suddenly very near. "You're afraid of storms?" he asked, his voice low. "Not usually," she admitted, "but this one seems particularly angry. Like me." The question was unexpected, almost vulnerable. Olivia turned to face him, surprised to find him so close. "Are you angry, Mr. Farrell?" "Matthew," he said. "If you're staying in my house, you might as well use my name." "Matthew," she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. "And I'm Olivia," he nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Another crack of thunder shook the house, and Olivia instinctively stepped closer to him. His hand came up, hovering near her arm as if he meant to steady her but thought better of it. "I'm not always angry," he said quietly, "though it seems to be what people expect of me." "Why is that?" Olivia found herself asking. "Why do you let them think that's all there is to you?" Matthew's expression darkened. "Because fear is a more effective deterrent than respect. I learned that from my father. But at what cost? To be so isolated, so alone." Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. "You're very direct, Olivia." "I've been told it's both my best and worst quality." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I can believe that." The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the kitchen, something had shifted between them, a tentative bridge forming across the chasm of their differences. "I should check on the horses," Matthew said finally, breaking the moment. "Make yourself comfortable in the parlor if you'd like. There are books." After he left, Olivia finished the dishes and wandered into the parlor. She selected a volume of Whitman's poetry from the shelves and settled into an armchair near the fireplace. The storm showed no signs of abating, rain lashing against the windows as wind howled around the eaves. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, Matthew was gently shaking her awake. "You'll be more comfortable upstairs," he said, his voice unusually soft. Olivia blinked up at him, momentarily disoriented. The book had fallen to her lap and Matthew picked it up, glancing at the title. "Whitman," he noted, "a favorite of mine." "I wouldn't have guessed that," Olivia admitted, standing. "There's a lot you wouldn't guess about me, Olivia." The way he said her name with a slight emphasis on the second syllable sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the storm. He led her upstairs to the guest bedroom, a spacious room with a 4-poster bed and simple but elegant furnishings. "My mother's taste," he explained, seeing her admiration. "She had a way of making spaces feel welcoming." "She's gone?" Olivia asked gently. Matthew nodded. 12 years now, she never really took to frontier life. It broke her in the end." The confession hung in the air between them. Olivia sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. "Thank you for your hospitality," she said instead. Matthew lingered in the doorway, looking as if he wanted to say something more. Finally, he simply nodded. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Matthew." After he left, Olivia changed into a nightgown she found folded in the dresser presumably left by the previous housekeeper and climbed into bed. Despite the comfortable surroundings, sleep eluded her. She found herself thinking of Matthew, of the glimpses of vulnerability beneath his harsh exterior. Sometime past midnight, a particularly violent thunderclap shook the house, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Olivia sat up, alarmed. She pulled on a robe she'd found hanging in the wardrobe and ventured into the hallway. Light spilled from beneath Matthew's door at the end of the corridor. She hesitated, then approached, knocking softly. "Matthew, is everything all right?" There was a pause, then his voice, tight with something she couldn't identify. "Fine, go back to bed." But there was a crash from within the room and concern overrode propriety. Olivia opened the door. Matthew stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily. A broken whiskey bottle lay at his feet, amber liquid spreading across the floorboards. Blood dripped from his right hand where he'd apparently cut himself on the glass. "You're hurt," Olivia said, crossing to him without hesitation. "It's nothing." He tried to turn away, but she caught his wrist. "Let me see." Perhaps it was surprise at her boldness that made him comply. She examined his palm where a jagged cut ran across it. "You need this cleaned and bandaged. Do you have supplies?" Matthew nodded toward a cabinet in the corner. Olivia retrieved a small medical kit and led him to sit on the edge of his bed. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made him hiss between his teeth, then binding it with clean gauze. "Thank you," he said gruffly when she'd finished. "What happened?" She gestured toward the broken bottle. Matthew's jaw tightened. "The thunder, sometimes it sounds like." He trailed off, looking away. "Gunfire?" Olivia guessed, remembering stories she'd heard about the war. He nodded once sharply. "I don't usually, it's been years since." "You don't have to explain," she said softly. She started to rise, but his uninjured hand caught hers. "No one knows," he said, his voice low, "about this weakness." "It's not weakness to be affected by what you've experienced, Matthew." His green eyes searched hers, looking for judgment or pity perhaps. Finding neither, something in him seemed to uncoil slightly. "You should go," he said, though he didn't release her hand. "This is highly improper." "Yes," Olivia agreed, but made no move to leave. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside this room, a different kind of tempest brewed, one made of unspoken words and unuttered feelings. Matthew's thumb traced a small circle on the inside of her wrist, and Olivia's breath caught. She knew she should pull away, return to her room, maintain the proper distance between employer and employee. But something held her there, something powerful and undeniable. "Olivia," he said, her name almost a question. "Yes, you should know that I." He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I'm not a good man, not the kind of man someone like you should." "Someone like me," she echoed, "someone bright and brave and—" He didn't finish the thought, instead releasing her hand and standing abruptly. "Forgive me, this is inappropriate." Olivia rose as well, suddenly very aware of her state of undress, the borrowed nightgown and robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Perhaps I should go." "Yes." But he didn't move aside to let her pass. Instead, he stood there, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. Lightning illuminated the room, throwing his face into sharp relief, the strong jaw, the faint scar through his eyebrow, the intensity of his gaze. Then darkness again, and in that moment of blindness, Olivia felt his hand brush her cheek, so lightly she might have imagined it. "Good night, Olivia," he whispered. "Good night," she replied, her voice equally soft. She made her way back to her room, her heart pounding, her skin still tingling where he'd touched her. Sleep seemed impossible now, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and unexpected longing. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. Olivia dressed in yesterday's clothes, feeling rumpled and self-conscious. She made her way downstairs, expecting to find Matthew, but the house was quiet. In the kitchen, she found a note propped against the coffee pot. "Had to check fences after the storm. Help yourself to breakfast. Will return mid-morning. MF." Relieved at the reprieve, Olivia prepared a simple breakfast, then set about her normal duties. By the time Matthew returned, she had regained her composure, though her heart quickened at the sound of his boots on the porch. He entered the kitchen, his clothes and hair damp from exertion. He'd removed his coat, and his white shirt clung to his broad shoulders. There was a smudge of dirt on his jawline that Olivia had the inexplicable urge to wipe away. "Good morning," she said, striving for normalcy. "Morning." He glanced at her, then away. "The road should be passable now if you want to head home. I can have one of the hands accompany you." "Thank you, but I'll be fine on my own." She hesitated. "About last night." "Nothing happened," he said quickly. "Nothing to discuss." But something had happened, Olivia thought. Not physically perhaps, but something had shifted between them, a door opened that couldn't easily be closed again. "Of course," she said aloud. "I'll just finish the dishes and be on my way." Matthew nodded, still not meeting her eyes. "I have business in town this afternoon. I won't be here when you arrive tomorrow." "I understand." He lingered a moment longer, as if wanting to say more, then turned and left the kitchen. Olivia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The ride back to Aunt Martha's farm gave her time to think. Whatever was developing between her and Matthew Farrell was dangerous, not least because of their positions. He was her employer, a man of considerable power in the region. She was a newcomer, dependent on his goodwill for her livelihood. An entanglement would be foolish at best, disastrous at worst. Yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. The fascination with the contradictions. He embodied harshness and vulnerability, anger and restraint, isolation and longing. Aunt Martha was in the yard when Olivia arrived, her face creased with worry that eased when she saw her niece. "Thank the Lord," she said, embracing Olivia. "I was so worried when that hand came last night with the message." "I'm fine," Olivia assured her. "Mr. Farrell was kind." Martha drew back, studying her face. "Kind was he. That's not a word often associated with Matthew Farrell. Perhaps people don't know him as well as they think." Something knowing entered Martha's expression. "Be careful, Olivia. Men like Matthew Farrell are complicated, and his reputation isn't entirely unearned." "What do you mean?" Martha sighed, leading Olivia inside. "There was an incident about 5 years back, a dispute with a neighboring rancher over water rights. Words were exchanged, then blows. Matthew nearly beat the man to death." Olivia felt cold despite the warm day. "What happened?" "The man lived, but he was never the same. Left the territory soon after, and Matthew—" Martha shook her head. It cemented his reputation. Most folks are too scared to cross him now. But you said he helps people too. Yes, Martha acknowledged, when he chooses to. But that temper of his, it's real, Olivia, and dangerous. Olivia nodded slowly, Martha's words sinking in. She thought of Matthew's hands, how carefully they'd held her aunt's china cup, how gentle they'd been when they touched her cheek. But also how powerful they were, how capable of violence. "I'll be careful," she promised, though she wasn't entirely sure what that meant anymore. The next morning, true to his word, Matthew wasn't at the ranch when Olivia arrived. She worked through her duties, finding herself lingering in his study, trying to piece together more of the puzzle that was Matthew Farrell. In a drawer of his desk, partially hidden beneath papers, she found a journal. Olivia knew she shouldn't look, but curiosity overcame her better judgment. She opened it to a random page and found not a diary but poetry, some copied from books she recognized, others apparently original. The handwriting was strong and distinctive, unmistakably Matthew's. One poem caught her eye, dated just the previous week. "She stands before me, unafraid when others cower and retreat. A flame that wind cannot dissuade, a heart that will not know defeat. What right have I to dim such light? To drag her down to where I dwell? Yet still I yearn through endless night, for grace I know I don't deserve." Olivia closed the journal, her heart racing. Could he possibly have been writing about her? The timing suggested it, but it seemed incredible that she could have affected him so deeply in such a short time. She returned the journal to its place, feeling both guilty for the invasion of privacy and strangely elated by what she'd found. This was a side of Matthew Farrell no one in Fargo would believe existed, the poet hiding behind the fearsome rancher. Late that afternoon, as Olivia was preparing to leave, she heard horses approaching. Looking out the window, she saw Matthew riding beside another man she assumed must be his brother Daniel. The resemblance was clear, though Daniel was leaner, his features less weathered, his bearing more relaxed. They dismounted near the stables, engaged in what appeared to be heated discussion. Olivia couldn't hear the words, but Matthew's posture was rigid, his gestures sharp. Daniel, by contrast, seemed to be trying to placate his brother, one hand raised in a calming motion. Olivia stepped away from the window, not wanting to be caught spying. She gathered her things and headed outside, intending to retrieve her horse and leave quietly, but Daniel spotted her as she crossed the yard. "Well, hello," he called, breaking away from Matthew and approaching her with a warm smile. "You must be Miss Zimmerman. I've heard all about you." His friendly manner caught Olivia off guard. "All good things, I hope," she replied, glancing past him to where Matthew stood watching, his expression unreadable. "My brother has become positively domestic since you arrived," Daniel said, his tone teasing. "Actually eating regular meals, I hear." "Daniel," Matthew's voice held a warning. But Daniel ignored him, offering his hand to Olivia. "Daniel Farrell, at your service, and may I say you are a vast improvement over old Mrs. Graves in every possible way." Olivia couldn't help but smile as she shook his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Daniel, please." "We can't have two Mr. Farrells confusing things, can we?" Matthew approached then, his jaw tight. "Miss Zimmerman was just leaving." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "So soon? But I've only just arrived, and I've been dying to meet the woman who stood up to my fearsome brother." A flush crept up Olivia's neck. It wasn't quite like that. "No." Daniel's eyes danced with amusement. "The way I heard it, you stole his glove right out of his hand and demanded compensation for his rudeness." "That is not what happened," Matthew growled. "I picked it up when he dropped it," Olivia clarified. "And I suggested a fair trade for the whiskey I'd accidentally broken." Daniel threw back his head and laughed. "Even better, no wonder he's been in such a state." "Daniel, enough," Matthew said sharply. He turned to Olivia. "I apologize for my brother. He forgets his manners when he's been too long in town." "No apology needed," Olivia assured him, "but I should be going. My aunt will be expecting me." "Of course," Matthew said, his tone formal. "Until tomorrow." Daniel watched this exchange with obvious interest. Perhaps Miss Zimmerman would join us for supper before she leaves. I'd love to hear more about Philadelphia. It's been years since I visited the East. Olivia hesitated, looking to Matthew. His expression gave nothing away. I wouldn't want to impose, she said carefully. Nonsense, Daniel insisted. It's no imposition. Is it, Matthew? A muscle worked in Matthew's jaw. No, he said finally. No imposition. And so Olivia found herself staying for supper, sitting across from Matthew at the dining room table while Daniel regaled her with stories of his travels. Matthew remained largely silent, though Olivia caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. After the meal, Daniel insisted on showing Olivia the library, a room she hadn't yet explored. It was a magnificent space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable leather chairs. Matthew's sanctuary, Daniel explained, though he lets me use it when I'm home. It's wonderful, Olivia said sincerely, running her fingers along the spines of the books. My brother has always found more comfort in books than in people, Daniel observed, his tone softer now, more serious. I can understand that, Olivia replied. Books are more predictable. Daniel studied her. You're not what I expected, Miss Zimmerman. No, what did you expect? Someone more, intimidated by him. He nodded toward the door where Matthew stood watching them, his expression guarded. Your brother doesn't frighten me, Olivia said, loud enough for Matthew to hear. Perhaps he should, Daniel replied, equally audible. He frightens most people. Matthew cleared his throat. It's getting late. Miss Zimmerman needs to be on her way. Daniel bowed slightly to Olivia. It was a pleasure meeting you. I hope we'll have more opportunities to talk. I'd like that, she replied sincerely. Matthew escorted her outside, his silence heavy between them. As they reached her horse, Olivia turned to him. Your brother is very different from you. Yes, Matthew agreed. He takes after our mother, charming, social. And you, his expression darkened, I'm more my father's son. The words seemed to pain him. Olivia remembered the stern-faced man in the daguerreotype, the hint that he'd been a hard man. I don't believe that, she said quietly. Matthew looked surprised. You don't know what I'm capable of, Olivia? I know you're more than what people say about you, more than your anger. He stared at her for a long moment, his green eyes intense in the fading light. Be careful on the road, he said finally, helping her mount her horse. As Olivia rode away, she glanced back to find him still standing there, watching her go, a solitary figure against the backdrop of his grand house. The next few days brought a shift in the atmosphere at the Farrell ranch. Daniel's presence acted as a buffer, diffusing the tension between Matthew and Olivia. The younger Farrell was lively company, full of stories and observations that made meals more entertaining than they had been. But Olivia couldn't help noticing the undercurrent between the brothers, a tension that suggested long-standing disagreements. Daniel frequently needled Matthew about his reclusiveness, his harsh reputation in town, while Matthew responded with curt dismissals or stony silence. One afternoon, as Olivia was polishing silver in the dining room, she overheard them arguing in Matthew's study. You're being unreasonable, Daniel's voice, uncharacteristically heated. The offer is more than fair. It's not about the money, Matthew responded, his tone controlled but with that dangerous edge Olivia had come to recognize. You know that. It's about your damned pride as always, your refusal to change, to move forward. This land is our legacy, Daniel. I won't sell it off piece by piece to line the pockets of Eastern speculators. One section, Matthew, one section that we barely use, to fund improvements that will benefit the whole region. My answer is no. There was a silence, then Daniel said, his voice lower now, Sometimes I think you enjoy being the villain, that you'd rather people fear you than respect you. Fear gets results, Matthew replied flatly. Respect is earned. And yet you've earned hers, haven't you, without fear. Another silence, longer this time. Olivia held her breath, knowing they were discussing her. Leave her out of this, Matthew said finally, his voice deadly quiet. Why? Because she sees something in you that you've spent years hiding. Because she makes you feel something other than anger. Daniel, I'm warning you. What will you do, brother? Beat me like you did Jackson. Prove to everyone, including Miss Zimmerman, that you're exactly the monster they think you are. The sound of something crashing against a wall made Olivia jump. She retreated to the kitchen, her heart pounding, the silverware forgotten on the dining room table. A few minutes later, Daniel stormed through the kitchen on his way out, his face flushed with anger. He paused when he saw Olivia. "I apologize if you overheard that," he said stiffly. "My brother and I have differences of opinion." "It's not my place to judge," Olivia replied carefully. Daniel's expression softened. "He's not always been like this, you know. After the war, after our father died, something broke in him. Or maybe it was always broken and he just stopped hiding it." Olivia wasn't sure how to respond. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his brother's that it startled her. "I'm heading into town for a few days," he said. "Business matters. Try not to let him scare you off while I'm gone." After Daniel left, Olivia deliberated whether to check on Matthew. Her better judgment said to leave him alone to let his temper cool, but concern won out. She approached his study and knocked softly. "Go away, Daniel." His voice was rough, angry. "It's Olivia." A pause, then, "Come in." She entered to find Matthew standing by the window, his back to her. A broken vase lay in pieces on the floor near the opposite wall. "I heard the argument," she admitted. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but we were hardly being discreet," he finished, still not turning. "My brother has that effect on me." Olivia approached cautiously, stopping a few feet behind him. "Do you want to talk about it?" Matthew let out a harsh laugh. "Talk, that's Daniel's solution to everything. Talk, negotiate, compromise. And yours?" Now he did turn, his expression guarded. "Action, decision, standing firm, even when it might be wiser to bend." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You think he's right?" "I think," Olivia said carefully, "that I don't know enough about the situation to have an opinion, but I know that family is precious, that disagreements can fester if not resolved." Matthew studied her, his anger seeming to recede slightly. "Your parents," he said after a moment. "Were they happy together?" The question surprised her. "Yes," she said. "Very. They had their disagreements, of course, but there was always respect, even in conflict." "That's rare," Matthew observed. "My parents' marriage was more like a battlefield, my father." He trailed off, his expression darkening again. "Was a hard man," Olivia finished for him, remembering his earlier comment. Matthew nodded. "Hard is one word for it. Cruel would be another, especially to my mother, and to Daniel, who was never the son he wanted." "And to you?" Olivia asked softly, a muscle worked in Matthew's jaw. "I learned to be what he required, to be stronger, tougher, to never show weakness." He glanced at the broken vase. "Though I never mastered control the way he demanded." The admission cost him, Olivia could tell. This glimpse into his past explained so much: his isolation, his reputation for harshness, the anger that seemed to simmer just beneath the surface. "I should clean that up," she said, nodding toward the broken pieces. "No," Matthew stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "I made the mess. I'll deal with it." The touch was brief, but it sent warmth spreading through her. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement of the growing connection neither of them had planned. "I should go," Olivia said, her voice not quite steady. "It's nearly 4. Matthew nodded, releasing her arm reluctantly. "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," she agreed, and left him standing there amid the fragments of his momentary loss of control. The following week brought subtle changes to their routine. With Daniel away, Matthew and Olivia were once again alone during her working hours. But their interactions had shifted, less formal, more comfortable. He began joining her in the kitchen while she prepared meals, sometimes helping with small tasks, their conversation flowing more easily. She learned about his experiences during the war, fighting for the Union despite his Southern-born father's disapproval. About his dreams for the ranch, for Fargo itself. In turn, she told him about her life in Philadelphia, her education, her hopes for the future. "You miss the city?" He asked her one afternoon as they shelled peas together at the kitchen table. "Sometimes," Olivia admitted. The libraries, the theaters, but there's something honest about life here, less pretense. Matthew's lips quirked. Fargo has its share of pretense, just of a different sort. True, she acknowledged with a smile. But the landscape, there's a beauty in its starkness, a freedom I never felt back east. Freedom, Matthew echoed. Yes, that's what drew me here too. After the war, after my father, I needed space to breathe. Their hands brushed as they worked, neither of them pulling away as they might have before. These small points of contact, innocent yet charged with meaning, had become a language of their own. One Saturday, Matthew surprised her by suggesting they ride out to check on a distant part of the property. It's not part of your duties, he said quickly, as if expecting her to refuse. But I thought you might enjoy seeing more of the land. I'd like that, Olivia replied, touched by the invitation. They rode out after breakfast, the day bright and clear, the prairie stretching to the horizon. Matthew was a different man on horseback, more relaxed, his movements fluid and confident. He pointed out landmarks as they rode, sharing stories of the ranch's early days. They stopped for lunch beside a small creek, spreading a blanket in the shade of one of the few trees. The domesticity of the scene struck Olivia as they unpacked the food she'd prepared, how natural it felt to be here with him, away from the constraints of town and their respective positions. Thank you for bringing me here, she said as they ate. It's beautiful. Matthew looked around as if seeing the landscape through her eyes. It is, isn't it? I sometimes forget to notice. Too busy with practical concerns, he nodded. There's always something that needs doing. Fences to mend, cattle to move, ledgers to balance. All work and no pleasure makes Matthew a dull boy, Olivia teased. To her delight, he laughed, a genuine laugh that transformed his face, softening the hard lines, bringing light to his eyes. Is that your professional assessment, Miss Zimmerman? Absolutely, she replied, smiling. As a temporary housekeeper, I'm qualified to make all sorts of judgments about my employer's personal habits. Matthew's expression grew more serious. And what other judgments have you made about me? The question hung between them, weighted with implication. Olivia considered her answer carefully. That you're more than what people say, more complex, more thoughtful. She hesitated, then added, more worthy of understanding than fear. Matthew's gaze held hers, something vulnerable flickering in those green depths. Even knowing what I'm capable of. The violence. I know what you've done, Olivia said quietly, but I also know who you are, the man who leaves supplies for widows, who funds improvements to the town school, who writes poetry when he thinks no one is looking. His eyes widened. You found my journal. Olivia flushed. I shouldn't have looked, it was private. To her surprise, Matthew didn't seem angry. What did you think? He asked, his voice low. Of the poems? They were beautiful, she answered honestly, especially the one about. She trailed off, suddenly unsure. About you, he finished, confirming her suspicion. Their eyes met across the small space between them, the admission hanging in the air. It would be so easy to bridge that gap, Olivia thought, so easy and so complicated. Matthew, she began, not sure what she meant to say. But a sudden crack of gunfire interrupted her. Matthew was on his feet in an instant, pulling her up and behind him in one fluid motion. Stay behind me, he ordered, scanning the horizon. What is it? Olivia asked, fear constricting her throat. Probably just hunters, he said, though his posture remained tense. But we're close to the disputed section, the land Daniel wants to sell. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Matthew swore under his breath. We need to get back to the horses, he said, keeping his body between Olivia and the direction of the shots. They had just reached the horses when 3 riders appeared over a rise, heading directly toward them. Matthew pushed Olivia toward her mare. Mount up, he said tersely. Quickly. She did as instructed, her hands shaking slightly as she grabbed the reins. Matthew swung into his own saddle just as the riders drew near. Well, well, called the lead rider, a rough-looking man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. If it ain't Farrell himself, trespassing on what's about to be Cooper land. This is Farrell property, Jenkins, Matthew replied, his voice cold. As you well know, The man Jenkins spat on the ground. Not for long from what I hear. Your brother's sellin' to Mr. Cooper and we're just checkin' out our future grazin' land. Olivia felt Matthew tense beside her. My brother has no authority to sell without my consent, he said evenly, and I haven't given it. Jenkins's gaze shifted to Olivia, a slow, unpleasant smile spreading across his face. And who's this pretty little thing? Don't tell me the great Matthew Farrell has finally found himself a woman. Matthew's hand moved to his gun belt. You're speaking to a lady, Jenkins. Mind your tongue. Jenkins laughed, a harsh sound. A lady, out here alone with you, that ain't what folks would call her in town. Before Olivia could register what was happening, Matthew had drawn his pistol and trained it on Jenkins. Apologize to the lady, he said, his voice deceptively calm. The other two men with Jenkins had their hands hovering near their own weapons. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest. Matthew, she said quietly, it's all right, let's just go. For a moment she thought he wouldn't listen, that the legendary temper would overtake his reason. But then he lowered his gun slightly. You heard the lady, he said to Jenkins. We're leaving, but make no mistake, this is Farrell land and it will remain so. Jenkins sneered but made no move to stop them as Matthew guided his horse around the men, indicating for Olivia to follow. They rode in tense silence until the men were well behind them. I apologize, Matthew said finally, his voice tight. You shouldn't have been exposed to that. It's not your fault, Olivia assured him. Who were they? Men who work for Edward Cooper, a rancher from the next county over. He's been trying to expand his holdings, and apparently he's approached Daniel about buying the northwest section of our property. The disputed land you and Daniel were arguing about. Matthew nodded grimly. Cooper's not a man to be trusted. If he gets a foothold on Farrell land, he won't stop there. They rode the rest of the way back to the ranch in silence, the easy camaraderie of their outing shattered by the confrontation. As they approached the house, Olivia saw another horse tethered outside a fine bay mare she recognized as belonging to Daniel. Your brother's back, she observed. Matthew's expression hardened. So he is. Inside, they found Daniel in the study, poring over documents spread across the desk. He looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness as he took in Matthew's thunderous face. You're back early, he said cautiously. We ran into Jenkins and two of Cooper's other men, Matthew said without preamble, on our land. They seemed to think a sale was imminent. Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. I told Cooper nothing was decided, that I needed your agreement, but you've been negotiating behind my back. I've been exploring options, Daniel corrected, which is my right as half-owner of this ranch. The tension between the brothers was palpable. Olivia started to back toward the door, feeling like an intruder in a private dispute. Stay, Matthew said, not looking at her but clearly aware of her movement. This concerns you too after what happened today. Daniel's eyebrows rose as he looked from Matthew to Olivia and back. What exactly did happen today? Jenkins insulted Miss Zimmerman, Matthew said, his voice tight. Implied impropriety because we were alone together. Understanding dawned on Daniel's face. Ah, he said. And you nearly shot him for it, I imagine. I should have, Matthew growled. And proven yet again that Matthew Farrell solves every problem with his fists or his gun. Daniel shook his head. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you. Your reputation affects more than just you now. Matthew frowned. What do you mean? Daniel glanced at Olivia. People talk, brother, about Miss Zimmerman spending her days here alone with you, especially after the night of the storm when she stayed over. Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks. That was entirely proper, she protested. There was a storm, the roads were impassable, I know that, Daniel assured her. But Fargo thrives on gossip, and when the subject is my brother and a beautiful newcomer. He spread his hands in a helpless gesture. Matthew's expression darkened further. What exactly are they saying? Daniel hesitated, his eyes flicking to Olivia again. Tell me, Matthew insisted. That you found yourself a mistress, Daniel said bluntly. That you're keeping her out here away from prying eyes, that her position as housekeeper is merely a convenient fiction." Olivia gasped, mortified. Matthew swore, his hands clenching into fists. "Who's saying this?" he demanded. "Give me names." "It doesn't matter who," Daniel replied. "It's the perception that matters. Your reputation, Miss Zimmerman's virtue, both are at risk the longer this arrangement continues." The implications hung heavy in the air. Olivia felt sick at the thought of her reputation being sullied, of Aunt Martha hearing such vicious gossip. "I should go," she said, her voice not quite steady. "It's past time anyway." "Olivia, wait," Matthew turned to her, his expression softening. "We can address this, make it clear that what?" she interrupted. "That I'm merely your employee. We both know it's become more complicated than that." The admissions silenced both brothers. Daniel looked between them with renewed interest, while Matthew's face reflected a mixture of concern and something deeper, more vulnerable. "We can find a solution," he said finally. "Daniel, surely there's a way to put these rumors to rest without what?" Daniel asked. "Without ending Miss Zimmerman's employment. I don't see another option, Matthew, not unless." He trailed off meaningfully. "Unless what?" Olivia asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Daniel smiled slightly. "Unless my brother makes an honest woman of you, Miss Zimmerman." Though I suspect that thought has already crossed his mind. The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia looked to Matthew, whose expression had gone carefully blank, though a muscle worked in his jaw. "This is not a conversation to have right now," he said tightly. "Miss Zimmerman has had a trying day, and this is hardly the way to," he broke off, clearly frustrated. Olivia straightened her spine. "I should get back to my aunt," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "We can discuss this tomorrow when we've all had time to think." Daniel rose from behind the desk. "I'll ride with you, Miss Zimmerman, to ensure you get home safely." Matthew looked like he wanted to object but thought better of it. "That would be best," he agreed reluctantly. "I have matters to attend to here." The dismissal hurt more than Olivia cared to admit. She nodded stiffly and left the room without another word, Daniel following close behind. The ride to Aunt Martha's farm was awkward, though Daniel did his best to put Olivia at ease with light conversation that carefully avoided any mention of the scene they'd just left behind. But as they approached the farmhouse, he grew more serious. "My brother is not demonstrative with his feelings, Miss Zimmerman," he said, "but I know him better than anyone, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Olivia kept her eyes on the road ahead. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," Daniel replied gently. "The question is, do you return his regard?" She glanced at him then, wondering at his directness. "That's a very personal question, Mr. Farrell." "Daniel," he reminded her with a smile, "and yes, it is personal, but also relevant to your future and to my brother's." They had reached the farm. Olivia dismounted, handing her reins to Daniel when he reached for them. "I care for your brother," she admitted quietly. "More than I should, perhaps, but there are complications beyond the gossip." "Such as?" "His temper, for one," Olivia said. "The violence you yourself have alluded to." "Can a man with such anger be a safe husband?" Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "Matthew's anger has always been his shield, Miss Zimmerman, a way to keep people at a distance, to protect himself from being hurt as our father hurt him." He paused. "But I've seen a change in him since you came. A softening, a willingness to let someone in." "Even so," Olivia said, "marriage is not a decision to be made because of gossip or convenience." "Of course not," Daniel agreed. "But sometimes external circumstances simply hasten what was already meant to be." He tipped his hat to her. "Think about it, Miss Zimmerman, and know that, for what it's worth, you have my blessing." With that, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving Olivia standing in the yard, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and conflicting emotions. Inside, Aunt Martha took one look at her face and sat her down at the kitchen table, placing a cup of hot tea in front of her. "What's happened?" she asked directly. Olivia told her everything: the confrontation with Jenkins, the revelations about town gossip, Daniel's hints about marriage. When she finished, Martha sat back with a thoughtful expression. Can't say I'm surprised about the gossip, she said finally. Small towns run on it, and you and Matthew Farrell make an interesting story. But it's not true, Olivia protested. Nothing improper has happened between us. In actions, perhaps not, Martha observed, but in feelings? She gave Olivia a knowing look. Olivia dropped her gaze to her tea. Is it so obvious? To someone who knows you, yes. Martha reached across the table to take her hand. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I don't know, Olivia admitted. I care for him, but there's so much I still don't understand. His anger, his past, and marriage is forever. Martha nodded slowly. When I agreed to marry your uncle, I barely knew him. 6 weeks of courtship, and then we were heading west together. A shadow crossed her face. It wasn't always easy. We had our struggles, our disappointments, but I never regretted saying yes. How did you know? Olivia asked. That he was the right one, Martha smiled, a distant look in her eyes. I didn't, not with certainty. But I knew he was a good man, despite his flaws, and I knew I'd rather face life's challenges with him than without him. And Matthew, do you think he's a good man, despite his reputation? Martha considered this. I think he's a man who's been shaped by pain and hardship. But yes, at his core, I believe there's goodness in Matthew Farrell. She squeezed Olivia's hand. The real question is, what do you believe? Olivia didn't sleep much that night, her thoughts circling endlessly. By morning, she had reached a decision. She would go to the Farrell ranch as usual, speak with Matthew directly, and together they would decide the best course of action. But when she arrived, it was Daniel who met her at the door, his expression grave. Matthew's gone, he said without preamble. Gone? Where? To confront Cooper. He rode out at dawn. Fear clutched at Olivia's heart. Alone, after what happened yesterday, Daniel nodded grimly. He was not himself last night. After you left, we argued again. Things were said. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm worried he'll do something rash. We have to go after him, Olivia said immediately. Daniel looked surprised, then thoughtful. Yes, he agreed. We do. I'll have the horses saddled. They rode hard toward Cooper's ranch, Daniel leading the way. As they crested a hill overlooking the property, they saw several men gathered in the yard, Matthew among them. Even from a distance, Olivia could see the tension in his posture as he faced a stocky, well-dressed man she assumed must be Cooper. We're too late, Daniel muttered. They're already confronting each other. They urged their horses forward, but before they could reach the yard, a shot rang out. Olivia's heart stopped as she saw Matthew stagger backward. No, she screamed, kicking her horse into a gallop. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion after that. Matthew falling to one knee, then drawing his gun with lightning speed. Another shot his this time, and Jenkins, who had been standing to Cooper's right, dropped his smoking pistol and clutched his shoulder. Men were shouting, guns being drawn, chaos erupting as Daniel and Olivia reached the edge of the yard. Hold your fire, Daniel shouted, his voice carrying across the commotion. The next man who pulls a trigger answers to the law. Something in his tone, or perhaps the rifle he now held at the ready, made the men pause. Cooper, a heavyset man with a florid face, raised his hands slightly. This is my property, Farrell, he said to Daniel. Your brother came here making threats, demanding I withdraw my offer on your land. And Jenkins shot him for that. Daniel's voice was cold. He drew first. Jenkins insisted, still clutching his bleeding shoulder. Was going for his gun. That's a lie, Matthew growled, still on one knee. Olivia could see blood seeping through his shirt at the shoulder. She dismounted and rushed to his side, ignoring the stares of the gathered men. You're hurt, she said, examining the wound as best she could. It's nothing, Matthew insisted, though his face was pale with pain. Just a graze. Matthew Farrell admitting an injury is nothing. Daniel's tone was light, but his eyes reflected concern as he kept his rifle trained on Cooper and his men. You must be a miracle worker, Miss Zimmerman. Cooper's gaze shifted to Olivia, his expression calculating. So this is the woman everyone's talking about, your brother's housekeeper. The way he said the word made Olivia's skin crawl. Matthew tensed beside her, struggling to rise. Watch your mouth, Cooper, he warned. Or what? Cooper challenged. You'll shoot me like you shot Jenkins. Add another violent incident to your reputation, Daniel intervened smoothly. What my brother will do is take his complaint about this unprovoked attack to the sheriff. Along with evidence of your men trespassing on Farrell land yesterday and threatening Miss Zimmerman. Cooper's expression faltered slightly. There's no evidence of that. My word against Jenkins, Matthew said, managing to stand with Olivia's support. And I think we both know who's the sheriff will believe, given Jenkins' record. A tense standoff ensued, broken finally by Cooper raising his hands in a gesture of concession. Take your brother and go, Farrell, he said to Daniel. But this isn't over. That land will be mine eventually. Not while I draw breath, Matthew said flatly. They withdrew slowly, Matthew leaning heavily on Olivia as they made their way to the horses. His injury made mounting difficult, but he refused to show weakness in front of Cooper and his men. I can ride behind you, Olivia suggested quietly. It would be safer. Matthew started to object but grimaced as a wave of pain hit him. All right, he conceded. Daniel helped arrange them on Matthew's horse, Olivia seated behind Matthew, her arms around his waist to steady him. Her mare was tethered to Daniel's horse as they rode away, keeping a watchful eye behind them until Cooper's ranch was out of sight. That was foolish, Matthew, Daniel said once they were safely away, confronting Cooper alone. I wasn't planning to, Matthew replied through gritted teeth. But I saw Jenkins on the road, followed him to Cooper's, overheard them planning to pressure you into selling while I was. He hesitated, distracted by Miss Zimmerman, you mean, Daniel deduced, by your feelings for her. Matthew didn't deny it. Olivia, her arms still around him, felt his body tense at his brother's words. We need to get you to a doctor, she said, changing the subject. You're still bleeding. Doc Miller's in Fargo, Daniel said. We'll head straight there. The ride back was tense and quiet, Matthew growing increasingly pale as they went. By the time they reached town, he was barely conscious, slumping against Olivia's supporting arms. Doctor. Miller's office was on the main street. Daniel helped his brother dismount, half carrying him inside while Olivia followed anxiously. The doctor, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, took one look at Matthew and directed them to a treatment room in the back. Another scrape, Mr. Farrell? He asked, though his tone held concern rather than judgment. Just patch him up, Doc, Daniel said. Questions can wait. Dr. Miller nodded, helping Matthew onto an examination table. He looked at Olivia uncertainly. Perhaps the lady would be more comfortable waiting outside. Before she could respond, Matthew's hand shot out, grasping hers. She stays, he said, his voice weak but determined. The doctor raised his eyebrows but didn't argue. He set about examining the wound, cutting away Matthew's bloodied shirt to reveal a deep furrow across his upper shoulder. Bullet grazed you, he confirmed. Missed anything vital, but you've lost blood. You'll need stitches. Matthew nodded grimly, still holding Olivia's hand. As the doctor prepared his instruments, Matthew looked up at her, his green eyes intense despite his pallor. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For putting you in danger, for the gossip, for all of it. Hush, Olivia replied, squeezing his hand. We'll talk about it later when you're better. Dr. Miller returned with a needle and surgical thread. This will hurt, he warned. I've got laudanum if you want it. No, Matthew said firmly, just do it. The stitching process was difficult to watch. Matthew's face went rigid with pain, his jaw clenched tight, but he made no sound. Olivia held his hand throughout, murmuring encouragement, her heart aching for his suffering. When it was done, the doctor bandaged the wound and gave stern instructions for rest and care. No riding for at least a week, he said firmly, and no fighting, Mr. Farrell, I mean at this time. Matthew managed a weak smile. I'll do my best, Doc. Outside, Daniel had arranged for a wagon to transport Matthew back to the ranch. He can't ride, he explained to Olivia, and I thought you might want to accompany him while I deal with the sheriff. She nodded gratefully. Yes, I would. The trip back to the ranch was slow and jarring, every bump in the road causing Matthew to wince despite his attempts to hide it. Olivia sat beside him in the wagon bed, supporting him as best she could. "You don't have to do this," he said at one point, his voice low. "Go back to town with the driver, I'll be fine." "I'm not leaving you," Olivia said firmly, "so save your breath for healing instead of arguing." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman." "Pot kettle," she replied, earning a weak chuckle from him. At the ranch, she helped him inside and to his bedroom, a large, sparsely decorated room that, like the rest of the house, showed little personal touch. Matthew sank onto the edge of the bed, clearly exhausted. "You need rest," Olivia said, her voice gentle but firm. "Doctor's orders." "Stay," he said, catching her hand as she turned to leave. "Please." The vulnerability in his voice undid her. She sat beside him on the bed, careful not to jostle his injured shoulder. "I'm here?" Matthew looked at her, his expression open in a way she hadn't seen before. "I thought about what Daniel said, about marriage." Olivia's heart quickened. "Matthew, you're injured and exhausted. This isn't the time, it's exactly the time," he interrupted. "When I was facing Cooper, all I could think about was you, about how I'd never told you." He trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. "Told me what?" Olivia prompted softly. "That I love you," he said simply. "That you've changed everything, the way I see myself, the way I see the world." The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, the man you truly are beneath the anger and the reputation." Matthew reached up with his good hand to touch her cheek. "I don't deserve you. But I want to try to be worthy of you if you'll let me." "Is this a proposal, Matthew Farrell?" Olivia asked, her voice unsteady. A real smile spread across his face, transforming it. "I suppose it is, though not how I would have planned it." He took her hand in his. "Olivia Zimmerman, will you marry me, even knowing my faults, my temper, my past?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will." His smile broadened, then faltered slightly. "The gossip will die down once we're married," Olivia finished for him. "And even if it doesn't, I don't care. I know the truth of us, and that's what matters." Matthew pulled her gently toward him, mindful of his injury, and kissed her a tender, reverent kiss that held the promise of their future together. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find this," he admitted quietly. "Someone who sees past the anger, who isn't afraid of me." "I was afraid," Olivia confessed, "but not of you, of what I felt for you, how quickly and completely it happened." They sat together in comfortable silence, the weight of the day's events settling around them, the reality of their decision taking root. "Daniel will be pleased," Matthew said after a while. "He's been not so subtly pushing for this since he met you." "He cares about you," Olivia observed. "Even when you fight?" Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "We're very different, but he's the only family I have left. I don't want to lose him over a piece of land." "Then don't," Olivia said simply. "Find a compromise. There's always a middle path if you're both willing to look for it." Matthew studied her face. "You make it sound so reasonable." "It is reasonable. Most things are, with enough care and thought." She smiled slightly. "Something to remember when your temper flares." "I'll try," he promised. "For you, I'll try." When Daniel returned that evening, he found them in the parlor, Matthew resting on the sofa, Olivia reading aloud to him from a volume of Whitman. He took in the scene with raised eyebrows. "Well," he said, removing his hat, "this is domestic." Matthew looked up at his brother. "The sheriff believes our version of events, especially after two of Cooper's other men came forward. Apparently they didn't sign up for attempted murder." Daniel smiled grimly. "Jenkins is facing charges and Cooper's been warned to stay off our land." "Good," Matthew said, then hesitated. "And the other matter we discussed, about the northwest section," Daniel looked surprised. "What about it?" "I've been thinking," Matthew said slowly. "Perhaps we could consider leasing part of it rather than selling outright. Maintain ownership but allow limited use for grazing with strict conditions." Daniel stared at his brother in astonishment. "Who are you and what have you done with Matthew Farrell?" "Very funny," Matthew growled, though without real heat. I'm trying to compromise, as a wise woman suggested I should. Daniel's gaze shifted to Olivia. A miracle worker indeed, he murmured. Then, more loudly, leasing could work. We'd need proper contracts, of course, and not to Cooper. Agreed, Matthew said firmly. Daniel smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made him look suddenly very much like his brother. Any other news you'd care to share? Decisions made, perhaps? Matthew glanced at Olivia, who nodded encouragingly. We're getting married, he said simply. Daniel's smile widened. About time. He crossed the room to kiss Olivia's cheek. Welcome to the family, Miss Zimmerman. I always wanted a sister. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Word of the engagement spread quickly through Fargo, transforming the salacious gossip into excited speculation about the upcoming wedding. Aunt Martha, thrilled by the news, threw herself into helping with arrangements. To everyone's surprise, Matthew took an active role in the planning, revealing a previously hidden talent for organization and attention to detail. He insisted on renovations to the ranch house, making it more comfortable and inviting for his bride. It was always just a place to sleep before, he explained when Olivia commented on his enthusiasm. Now it will be our home. The changes weren't just physical. As news of Matthew's engagement spread, people began to see him differently. His fearsome reputation didn't vanish overnight, but it softened somewhat. When he accompanied Olivia into town, people were more likely to greet him than shrink away. You're changing how they see me, he observed one afternoon as they left the general store, where the owner had actually smiled at him. Breaking down the walls I built. You're changing it yourself, Olivia corrected, by showing them who you really are. They were married on a bright September day, with half of Fargo in attendance. The ceremony took place on the ranch, beneath an arch twined with wildflowers. Olivia wore a cream-colored gown ordered from Chicago with Aunt Martha's lace veil. Matthew, freshly shaved and dressed in a new suit, looked almost unrecognizable, his face relaxed, his eyes bright with happiness. Daniel stood as best man, beaming with pride as his brother spoke his vows in a clear, steady voice. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, drawing cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration lasted well into the night, with food and dancing and more laughter than the Farrell ranch had ever known. As twilight settled over the land, Matthew led Olivia away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the creek where they'd had their picnic months before. Happy, he asked, his arm around her waist. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his embrace. And you? More than I ever thought possible. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I want you to know that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you, to control the anger that drove so many away. I'm not afraid of your anger, Matthew, Olivia said softly. I never was, not really. No, he agreed with a smile. You caught my glove and didn't let go, even when everyone told you to run. Best mistake I ever made, she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Later that night, as they lay together in the master bedroom, now their bedroom, Olivia ran her fingers along the scar on Matthew's shoulder, a permanent reminder of that fateful day at Cooper's ranch. Does it still hurt? She asked. Sometimes, he admitted, but it was worth it. It brought us here. No more confronting armed men alone, Olivia said firmly. Promise me. Matthew caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. I promise. I have too much to live for now. The years that followed brought changes to the Farrell ranch and to Fargo itself. Daniel's business acumen combined with Matthew's practical knowledge made their operation one of the most successful in the territory. The leasing arrangement for the northwest section proved profitable while maintaining family ownership, a compromise that satisfied both brothers. Olivia found her place not just as Matthew's wife, but as a respected member of the community. She started a small library in town, using books donated from their own extensive collection and funds raised through subscription. Later, she helped establish Fargo's first proper school, serving on its board and occasionally teaching classes herself. 2 years after their wedding, their first child was born, a boy they named Thomas, after Olivia's father. He had his father's green eyes and his mother's inquisitive nature. 2 years later came a daughter, Margaret, named for Matthew and Daniel's mother. Matthew proved to be a devoted, if sometimes overprotective, father. The tenderness he showed his children revealed the depth of love he was capable of, further eroding the fearsome reputation that had once defined him. His temper didn't disappear entirely, it flared occasionally, especially when his family was threatened or treated unfairly. But he learned to channel it, to use that fierce energy to protect and build rather than to intimidate. Cooper eventually left the territory after financial difficulties forced him to sell his ranch. Jenkins served a brief prison term for the shooting and then drifted west, never to return to Fargo. The disputes that had once seemed so critical faded into memory as new challenges and opportunities arose. Daniel married a few years after Matthew, a lively young woman from Minneapolis who matched his wit and business sense. The brothers, once so often at odds, found a comfortable balance in their partnership, each respecting the other's strengths. Aunt Martha lived to see her great niece and nephew grow into young children, spending her final years in a comfortable cottage on the Farrell property, surrounded by the family she had helped bring together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew surprised Olivia with a journey east to Philadelphia, to visit her parents' graves and to show their children where their mother had grown up. It was his first trip that far east since before the war, and though he was initially uncomfortable in the crowded city, he endured it gladly for her sake. Standing beside her at the cemetery, his arm steady around her waist as she placed flowers on the graves, he said quietly, "They would be proud of the woman you've become." Olivia leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I hope so. And I hope they would approve of the man I chose." "A man with a notorious temper?" Matthew asked, a hint of old insecurity in his voice. "A man with a passionate heart," Olivia corrected. "Who loved me enough to change, but not so much that he lost himself." That night in their hotel room after the children were asleep, Matthew presented her with a small box. Inside lay a pair of leather gloves, finely made, with her initials embroidered on the cuffs. "To replace the one you stole," he explained with a smile. Olivia laughed, remembering that fateful day in front of the general store. "I didn't steal it, I picked it up when you dropped it. And held on," he added, pulling her close, "when anyone with sense would have thrown it back at me and run." "I never claimed to be sensible," Olivia replied, winding her arms around his neck. "Just stubborn enough to see the man behind the anger." "Thank God for that stubbornness," Matthew murmured against her lips. "It saved us both." Upon their return to Fargo, they found the town transformed from the rough frontier settlement Olivia had first encountered. New buildings lined the main street, including a proper bank, a hotel, and a schoolhouse. The railroad had expanded, bringing increased trade and prosperity. The Farrell name, once whispered with fear, was now associated with the town's growth and stability. As the children grew, the Farrell Ranch became known for its hospitality rather than its isolation. Matthew and Olivia hosted regular gatherings that brought together people from all walks of Fargo life: ranchers, merchants, teachers, newcomers seeking their fortune in the West. "You've tamed the beast of Fargo," Daniel joked at one such gathering, watching his brother laugh with guests who once would have trembled in his presence. "The man everyone feared is now the social heart of the county." Olivia smiled, following his gaze to where Matthew was showing a group of children, including their own, how to properly throw a lasso. "Not tamed," she corrected. "Just loved. There's a difference." "Indeed there is," Daniel agreed thoughtfully. "You saw what the rest of us missed, that his anger wasn't the core of him, just the armor he wore." On their 20th anniversary, with Thomas preparing to leave for university in the East, and Margaret blossoming into a young woman as headstrong as her mother, Matthew and Olivia rode out alone to the creek that had become their special place. They spread a blanket beneath the same tree where they'd shared their first picnic, now grown taller and broader with the passing years. Matthew's hair was more silver than dark now, and fine lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, which he did far more often than anyone would have believed possible in the old days. 20 years, he marveled, taking Olivia's hand in his. Sometimes I still can't believe you said yes. The best decision I ever made, she replied, her auburn hair now threaded with strands of gray, her beauty deepened by time and experience. Though I admit there were moments early on when I questioned my sanity. Matthew laughed, the sound easy and natural now. As did everyone else in Fargo. He grew more serious. Do you ever regret it, staying here instead of returning to city life? Olivia shook her head. Never. This is home, our home. She gestured to the landscape stretching around them, the land they had nurtured together. What about you? Any regrets? Only that I wasted so many years angry at the world before you came along, he answered honestly. Think of all we could have had if I'd met you sooner. Everything happened as it should, Olivia said, leaning against his shoulder. We found each other when we were ready, when you were ready to let someone in and I was ready to stand my ground. Matthew nodded, his arm tightening around her. The day you caught my glove, he remembered. The day everything changed. As the sun set over the Dakota Prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat together in comfortable silence, the journey of their lives together stretching behind and before them like the vast, beautiful landscape they called home. The man once feared for his anger had found peace in love's embrace, and the woman who had refused to be intimidated had found strength in his. Together, they had built something neither could have imagined alone: a family, a legacy, a love story that would be retold in Fargo for generations to come.